Welcome to Totally Talent Podcast by HR.com, your go-to source for all things talent. Whether you're looking for expert insights on high-volume hiring, the latest trends in recruitment technology, or strategies for building a winning team, we've got you covered. Join us for each episode as we dive deep into the challenges and opportunities shaping the talent landscape today. Let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Totally Talent on HR.com. I'm your host, Mike Wood, and I am here today with my friends from Socure. If you guys want to introduce yourself, that would be great. Zach, I'll start with you.
Hey, sounds good. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for having us. I'm Zach Cilman. I'm the GM for the workforce vertical here at Socure. Excited to talk with you today, Mike.
Great. Thanks for having you.
Yeah, my name is Jinbae Kim. I lead the workforce verification product here at Socure. I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having us, Mike.
Great. So we have product and sales here. Tell me, let's get a little background. What does Socure do?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. So I would think of Socure as we've been the best company in the world at simply answering the question on the internet of, is Mike Wood a real person? Is this Mike Wood? And should we do whatever we're about to do with Mike Wood? Typically that looked like consumer transactions, but as we think about workforce, it's, is Mike Wood a real enough person to be considered in a hiring funnel? We've been doing this for 13 years. We have about over 3,000 customers across probably 10 different verticals. We started off in banking, kind of moved to fintechs. Now we work with the federal government, state government, online gaming, online gambling, anywhere where identity is critical to kind of e-commerce and where having certainty around identity is typically regulated. That's where Socure has been. I know that we're on an HR.com podcast, so you're probably thinking, "Oh, that's great, Zach. You work with a lot of banks."
No, it makes sense. It actually makes sense.
Yeah. So, establishing identity was something that was really relevant 13 years ago in e-commerce and banking. And then as we've kind of moved into a more digital world where we're all doing kind of many things online, including people that work fully remote online, myself included, the question of, is this really Zach and is Zach a real person, has become relevant kind of across the internet. So kind of in the HR space specifically, we've been doing work here for a while. Kind of starting with payroll companies, which is separate of kind of some of the current threats that I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on today. So if you think about big payroll companies like ADP, like Gusto, like Earnin, like Daily Pay, Paycor, been customers of ours for a while. And then, we also partner with background check companies as well. So if you've ever, if you purchase identity verification for what it's will from Checker or First Advantage, that's also kind of being powered by Socure. So there's lots of new kind of threats and things, and I'll let you ask your question. So there's a lot we can do with kind of the new fake applicant, fake candidate problem. But I guess if you think about Socure, we're a company that's been kind of leading the identity space for a while now.
And it makes sense for it to start in banking, really, 10, 15 years ago. But now it's becoming everybody has more options to be fraudulent, I would say now. It's easier than ever. Jinbae, since you run the product, like what are you seeing in terms of like, what are some things that some bad actors are doing to get around identity verification?
Yeah, and I'll say even before I answer that question, Mike, let me just say one thing real quick. Is a lot of people ask me, especially in the HR space, and I come from HR tech background for the past several years, and one of the things that I get asked a lot from HR professionals is, why are they coming here? Like, it doesn't make sense. Why are they trying to go through all these different stages to come here? And we actually just spoke at our Socure Identity Summit, and it's really because they are coming in with trusted access when they get through this pipeline, right? So typically, I think security professionals in the world have kind of looked at external threats at the perimeter, but they never really considered the hiring funnel as part of that perimeter. And so therefore, HR systems have not been able to defend, HR processes have not been able to defend against these bad actors. And so it makes a lot of sense if I put myself in the shoes of a fraudster that let's attack the space because these systems and processes are not ready to defend against it, one. And two, when I get in, I have access to everything. It's going to be really difficult for me to actually be detected as an employee at Socure or like an actual employee at Socure or a fraudster trying having entered with legitimate credentials, right? So, yeah, I just want to lay the foundation there, right? So, and so to your question, Mike,
Well,
the
Jinbae,
reason,
can I add
yeah,
one third thing too? So, and
yeah,
Mike, you've alluded to this. Fraud's a business. Fraud's a business that's either run by nation states or it's run by kind of just criminal enterprises. And if you think about AI, and everyone's talking about AI, what it's done for the business of fraud is it's really brought the cost down to zero. And so now you can lay as many fraud attempts out as you want. Whereas before, maybe you had to have a team of developers or engineers and equipment. There was a lot more infrastructure that you needed. Now you just need an AI prompt. So to Jinbae's point, it's like once you're in, you can cause a lot of havoc and kind of do a lot of the similar fraudulent activity that you may have done before in terms of stealing, whether that be secrets or money or, just having access to places you shouldn't be. But then on top of it, on the front end, there's way less of a cost. So it's the combination of those two things, I think, kind of come together. And I know, Jinbae, you're going to pick up that question.
yeah, and yeah, it's a great point, Zach. So I think just given the lack of protocol around identity verification, um, in the past, this is why they're attacking this vector. And so, Mike, I think there really hasn't been a lot of identity verification in the past in current HR process or systems, right? So typically what HR in the HR world, what's been used as controls has been I-9 verification, has been background checks, has been just interviews, right? And looking at applications and making sure that they're real people. All of that is very easy to fake, and this is why we need identity verification, and typically at multiple stages in the hiring lifecycle. Um, and the AI, I know Zach alluded to AI, so I'll tell you a little bit of like the path that these fraudsters might take. So at the application stage, it's extremely easy to create a fake resume. So you just use an LLM, put in a JD, and say, "Hey, give me the perfect resume for this job description." It generates really quickly. You can use LLMs to mass apply to
And by
applications.
LLMs, just so we're all on the same page, you mean like a ChatGPT or like a Claude or something like that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, exactly. Yeah. So basically, at the application stage, they don't. No, the fraudsters don't have to do much. They just write a very simple program that does it all, takes care of everything. And then at the interview stage, they'll go into an interview, use proxy interviewers, use deepfakes, use masking, voice manipulation, use LLM assistants, right? Tools that can help you answer questions. And then during background check, if they sold an identity already, background check doesn't actually. If I stole Zach's identity and I ran a background check can come clean. No criminal records, right? Like Zach does work at Socure, yes. However, I'm not actually Zach. I'm Jinbae. And then post background check during onboarding, you could have onboarding through rented identity, an American identity that's helping some of these fraudsters in other countries that can kind of get through. Yeah, so I think ultimately it makes like entering this pipeline is so much easier now with the availability of all the AI tools out there.
So I think if I heard you all right, you said rented identity, which means that I'm assuming that this means that I could be like my identity could be bought by someone in North Korea or something. They could be using it. If my identity was worth nothing, I'd be all like, "Yay, let's do it." It's not worth a lot. You get a lot of debt attached to my identity, but like that's interesting that you can have these Trojan horses kind of sitting out there. I've heard some horror stories already about there were a couple hospitals that North Korean applicants got into. And I've heard just anecdotally, there's some people that are interviewing people now that require them to like do this in front of their face. So if you're listening, I'm putting my fingers in front of my face, which is just a simple little thing. Just tell me you're a real person. But like, if you just think about it in your normal lives, like every time I get a text from someone that I don't recognize, every time I got someone coming by my door trying to sell me something that I don't recognize, you wish you had these tools. So like, tell me about like what you do to help. How do you combat this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And, if you zoom really far out, there's a reason why you need help to answer some of these questions because I think the human brain is not necessarily wired to make the distinctions that some of this fraud can require, right? If you think about kind of like what existed before this problem, it was, hey, Mike Wood wants to come work at Socure. Mike Wood's going to show up to our office. We're going to sit down and have a meeting. There was always some amount of fraud going on, people, fudging things on their resume. Obviously, background checks existed for a reason because some people have backgrounds that may make them unfit for certain roles, depending on the nature of it. But just like sussing out, are you real or are you not real, is just, it's a very difficult thing to do in a way that's non-biased, because what you'll do is you'll just fall back on whatever you've seen or whatever works or whatever, one thing, Jinbae and I, we've spoken to a lot of customers of ours and prospects and just kind of been out talking to people. And, the things that people are doing without technology to help solve this problem and solve for underlying identity is just kind of making things up, right? Like you just brought up a good example, like, move
Yeah.
your hand, or, they'll look at a stack of resumes and say, hey, we found two, fake people that went to Georgia Tech. So we're just not going to interview people that went to Georgia Tech for engineering roles. And look, I went to Virginia Tech, so Georgia Tech's an ACC rival of ours, but still Georgia Tech is it's a great engineering school. And there's definitely real people that went there, so that should still be considered for roles. So I think, what we try to do is just bring that same kind of underlying identity infrastructure into the process. And what we've done over 13 years is kind of work in the back end of banks and kind of all the places of e-commerce. And, we have what we call a persistent identifier, basically attached to everyone in the US, at least everyone over 18, that we've kind of seen you in different places. We've also seen your device in different places, and we can sort of make these correlations with pretty high confidence that, like, hey, this is Mike Wood. Like, we know that if it's Mike Wood, like, he's on this iPhone in Massachusetts and like this IP address because we've seen him at his bank or his Chime account or, whatever it may be, right? And so we try to bring that objectivity to different stages of the hiring process, primarily working with companies, whether that be kind of ecosystem players or, just companies that hire a lot of people, to build in certain checks, primarily that will happen in the background just to validate, that you're really a real person and that you're really you. Now, we're not saying like you may be Mike Wood and you still may not be the right person for the job. And that's a whole other part of the process. But I think that's what the process is already designed to get the answers to, right? It's not designed to have the answer to, is Mike Wood a real person? And so just depending on, where you are in the process and then the relative, risk of whether time loss or money loss or security risk, we can do different checks. So if we're thinking about like a stack of resumes with just like a phone and an email address and a name, like those are three pieces that we can start to correlate to understand, is this really Mike Wood? Because all of us do have a digital identity, right? Like I have a social security number, I have an address, I have multiple phone numbers that could probably be associated with multiple addresses, email addresses. Like we have these things. There is like a real version of me, of Jinbae, of you that exists. So we try to do as much correlation as we can in the background, deliver signal via ATSs to TA teams. Not to say like, look, this person's definitely a fraud, but it's like, hey, like we've seen this phone number
just flag
associated
it.
with
Yep.
75. Yeah, just flag it. And then that doesn't mean that you throw them out per se, but like do a double look. They might still be the perfect person for the job. And then there's stepped up things you can do kind of as you get into like, okay, now we're really going to make an offer, or, we're going through the I-9 process where we can bring in things like biometrics, do selfie verification, maybe do an ID verification, just depending on, kind of who the end customer is and what their risk posture is. So our whole perspective is that I don't think that there should be a one size fits all approach. to identity verification as it relates to like a hiring process. I think each company has their own risk posture. I think that there's certain friction that you can add to the hiring process that, depending on the nature of the role and kind of the nature of the company, may or may not be worth it, right? Because I think at the end of the day, one thing we hear kind of across the board is that, folks in talent acquisition, they're not necessarily looking to be fraud fighters, right? Like what they're passionate about is finding great people to add value to the companies that they work for, right? Building the organization that's going to achieve the mission. And that in and of itself is a huge full-time job. So when you add this, so our goal is like, how can we make this kind of fit into the existing process? How can we deliver actionable signal when necessary? And then how can we have like high levels of protection when, we kind of go from like, okay, this is no longer just a candidate, like we're about to hire this person. Let's just really make sure that they're real, really make sure it's them, if it's a remote role that's about to turn on their computer, right? Or that it's still them working here 6 months later. So I think that's where we'll start using kind of more consumer facing tools where there'll be some interaction from, the applicant, candidate, employee, whatever phase it may be. But our goal is to really do as much of this as possible in the background, kind of no different than, cybersecurity companies exist. And like, we all know they exist. You don't really run into them very often. Like maybe every so often you'll have to click like, I'm not a robot when you go on a website, but like, this is all just happening. Right. And like, they kind of have a dictionary of like what's what on the internet, and they're making sure that websites aren't just getting crushed by bots. I think if Socure, if we kind of do this correctly, that's what it should look and feel like, to just go back to kind of maybe business as usual with a couple new signals to look at. And Jinbae, feel free to expound on that.
Yeah, there's maybe a few things I'll just add. I think I'll just double down on what Zach said at the very beginning, right? And I come from the HR tech space, so I care a lot about candidates. I have cared a lot about the candidate experience for several years. That example of recruiters thinking through, hey, like I saw people that came from Georgia Tech is fraudulent, I'm not going to interview them anymore. We actually interviewed like hundreds of recruiters and spoken to hundreds of recruiters, right? And so one thing we found out is that each recruiter has their own version of that. So, which is the like challenging part, right? It's like all humans have their own heuristics of how they go through life. And one thing I want to avoid caring about candidates is how do we make sure candidates are given a fair, equal opportunity, and they are given, like a human process experience where they're not asked to do all these additional things along the way. Is remote work going to go away because these fraudulent candidates, right? There's a lot of potential like downstream impacts here to the candidate experience. And I think for me, I care a lot about making sure we can maintain the level of frictionless, humane experiences that candidates are provided today. And the only way that we can actually do that is solve this problem. And the second thing I'll double down on is we want to do a lot of this passively, and in order to really solve this problem, we have to look at verifications in the background at different stages. So as Zach mentioned, different companies have different risk postures. And so maybe a company that has really sensitive data, they might want to be a lot more careful and might say that they might want to add a little bit more friction so that they can get more security. That being said, I think a general kind of flow of how we want to do things is just across, at the application stage, I look at the PI information we get at the application, like Zach mentioned. But one thing we're also doing is looking at workforce specific signals. Like we've seen real examples of, people that apply to Socure with some of these new signals that are very specific to workforce. So we've seen, hey, Zach and Jinbae both applied to Socure, but despite them claiming to be two different identities, their resumes are nearly identical. Like, yep. Is that truly possible? Right? Like, is that coincidence? Most likely not, right? So when we add that into all the PII information and validation that we're doing on our end, we feel pretty confident with our score. But that being said, they can swap stages, right? As I mentioned earlier, but swap identities, and people can show up. The person that shows up to interview 1 could be different from interview 2, interview 3, and later at onboarding. So even at interview stage, right, one thing we're trying to lead with is how do we passively in the background, the candidate doesn't have to do anything else. The interviewer doesn't have to do anything else. But how can we verify that there's no injections, no deepfakes, no masking, right? no voice manipulation. How can we verify that passively? And how can we verify it's the same Mike Wood that's showing up, the same face showing up across the interviews and during onboarding, right? Yeah, so typically, we want to make sure that, when they're at the I-9 phase or during a background check phase, we want to make sure that they do a little bit more higher assurance when they're showing their document that they're eligible to work here. Let's just make sure the document is also real. But outside of that, I think really our goal is let's keep the process as much as we can the way it is. But let's also try to make sure we solve this problem so that at the end of the day, we're not taking away things from employees and candidates, right?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that the industry has been changed by AI over the past year or so is I think a lot more of finding these issues and flagging these or abnormalities in the application phase have to come earlier. And that people aren't waiting till that final step after wasting 3 weeks or whatever with not. So if the earlier you can sense that somebody is not who they say they are, at least be able to ask them about it or talk about it, that's great. So have you guys found that you're moving that up more in your process with your clients yet? Or, I mean, it's something that is coming, but I haven't really seen it too much in practice yet, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Mike. And it's really the origin story of how kind of Jinbae and I ended up at the company. So Socure actually, I mean, we're a company just like, I'm imagining most of the folks listening to this work at a company. That's why they're interested in something like this. So
Yeah.
we were under attack. So Socure, experienced this problem head on. We had North Korean operatives trying to get jobs, and we still do. I mean, constantly do, trying to get jobs at Socure. So, it was early days and this wasn't as a high awareness issue as maybe it is now. And I think there's still some awareness and learning to do. But yeah, basically what we've done is we to put it in startup speak, we eat our own dog food here. So everything that we talk about kind of doing, we test it ourselves first on our own companies. So we've pushed Signal all the way up to the application phase. And we do a lot of testing. Kind of, obviously, we have a really strong sense of identity. That's kind of our core business, and we do it in very regulated spaces. But this is a newer application, and so I know Jinbae spends a lot of his time, even when we flag people, to your point, Mike, going through and making those phone calls and ensuring are our signals right here. So what we'll do is at the application phase, when we get a resume, we'll take certain signal and we'll run it through some checks in the background to confirm an identity and whether or not it's real. And then we kind of add in some of the biometric stuff at different parts in our process. So we'll do what's called a document verification, where you'll submit a government ID through our capture app. And additionally, with a selfie, we have an ability to do a selfie re-verification. So once you have a log of my face, we can look at not only the device data, so confirming it's the same device and it's in a similar location, but maybe you're on vacation, maybe you got a new phone. I mean, some things about your identity can naturally change. So then we can also compare and contrast against. And when I say compare, we do this with technology. So this is happening automatically throughout the process. So yeah, I mean, everything that we push out, we try it in-house first. And Jinbae can kind of speak to kind of some of the numbers. We were just looking at this for a customer today, but I mean, Jinbae, I know you just pulled up some fresh numbers on kind of what we're seeing. And just keep this in mind, the people that we work with are fraud fighters, right? My boss, Matt Thompson, he's a legend. He was Army Ranger commander, right? Really got into the identity space because he had seen instances of stolen valor. So there's a lot of people here that.
So it's personal for him. He's got something on his desk that says fraud with a big thing across it.
I think a lot of the people here, myself included, kind of feel that way, right? So we don't take it lightly when, customers also trust us with a lot of their customers' data. So it's we don't take it lightly that someone's trying to come in and commit fraud this way. So we stood up a whole team to kind of solve this problem. And what's crazy I mean, it's just how, if they're coming for us, like they'll go for anyone. Like you would assume a company that works in, quasi cybersecurity identity would be able to stop something like this. So like, that's just how brazen it's become. But Jinbae, you can talk a little bit about kind of the numbers we've seen just with like,
Yeah.
nothing specific, I guess, outside of our company, but just like the amount of fraud we're seeing, even for folks trying to apply to Socure.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fun stories I know. Micah, we can maybe reserve the end too for some fun stories. But yeah, at Socure, I checked last month. We had, and it actually has been consistent for the past year, about 20 something percent. So between 20 and 25% of every applicant has been fraudulent. So that's about 5,000 candidates per month that we're seeing as fraudulent. And really the reason, right? There's the reason why we started thinking through this is because our recruiters were coming up to us and saying, guys, we can't hire for all the open roles. Like it's impossible. We are having 10 interviews and 6 of them are fake. And the reason why it's highly weighted against fake candidates is because they're coming up with fake resumes that fit exactly the job description. So it makes sense that when they're scheduling calls with the best candidates with best resumes, they're fake because they created fake resumes and they're perfect, right? Um, and they were like struggling to actually get any hiring done. They were struggling to fill roles. The number of interviews they had to do to fill a role, the number of like days a rec was open was getting increased by like 100%. It was just a mess for recruiters. And, obviously hiring is extremely important for Socure because we're growing a lot and we need to get the right people in quick. And so that was like the first problem. We were like, okay, we have to solve this. That's the reason why we wanted to bring in the verification up front at the application stage. But there's also a second reason, right? And I mentioned this earlier, but I'm just going to try to expand on it a little bit more. It's required that we need to have an understanding of the applicant at that stage, so that we can have an understanding of what has changed in future processes, right? So the most sophisticated coordinated attack from North Korea, they use identity rentals. So just to give you a real life illustration of what things that can happen, I steal Zach's information because he's my insider, right, in the US. So if you have Zach's first name, last name, email, phone number that are real, then everything might turn up okay, right?
Jinbae, just to clarify the point too, it's not that Jinbae would steal my information in that example. This is a coordinated thing. So you could go onto Reddit. It's like the North Korean operatives aren't stealing American citizens' identity in this instance. They're actually working together. And there's a case where a woman got caught in Vegas. She had 20 laptops from different companies. And so basically the business concept is like, I'm an American citizen. Mike is not. He's trying to sneak into a company. Mike finds me on the internet and is like, hey, I'm qualified to get this job. Like, you go get it, and then I'll pay you 20%, and I'm going to do the other 80%. And I'm literally just going to work in this company, and I'm either going to be there as a sleeper, or I'm just going to be making money off this. We heard a stat recently that North Korea is making $500 million a year just off of this type of operation, which is crazy. But go ahead, Jim.
And yeah, it's not even just North Korea, right? It's there. I personally, I interview a lot of these fake candidates that applied to Socure just to understand the tactics that they use. I've probably seen like 12 different, like, nationalities. It felt like, but yeah, they've adopted this like identity rental, very sophisticated coordinated attack, this playbook. But if I stole Zach's, or not stole, if I borrowed Zach's identity, right, because we're working together and applied, everything might look good, right? But during the interview stage, maybe Zach can't speak about how to do the software engineering job that he applied for, that we applied for. Or maybe he can't do a data science job that we applied for together. So therefore, that's when maybe even if I use Zach's rented identity, maybe I'm coming on with the deep fake with Zach's images, right? Zach's face, Zach's voice, and showing up. Maybe someone else is better suited to answer another question. And maybe Zach is actually the one showing up, and then third person's showing up for the third interview, and so forth. So what's incredibly important for us is like, we just need to have an understanding of the candidate throughout that journey so that we can have higher assurance along at the end, right? If you're only doing any check in one point, it's really difficult to actually know in the is this a really sophisticated attack or not? It's difficult to actually see that without having multi-stage verification at the end of the day.
This is fascinating. Tell me one of the more outrageous stories that you have, because you've piqued my interest now.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do two.
Okay, good.
So there's one example, and I actually saw this recently. So in China, they have really, really sophisticated deep fake software, and it's incredible. The example that I saw was crazy. Like, Mike, you gave me that example.
Yep.
It passes that test. Yeah, it passes that test. If someone says, "Hey, put your hand in front of your face," they'll be able to do it without breaking it. So like, using that kind of software, it's just incredible how far technology has come and to enable this, right? So that's one example. I'll just say there's one that I saw and I was like, this is crazy. If I didn't have all the other signals, like in that example, the resume was the same, right? So like resume was the same with another candidate. And so, and their email was wrong and phone number. And so I was like, well, if I didn't have those signals, there's no way I would have known that, because I asked them to do that and they passed. So there's no way I would have known during that interview at that point in time. Another one that I'll mention is this is not just impacting, actually I'll do two more. It's not just impacting remote companies or large companies. That's a big misconception in this space right now. So I actually heard this from at the Identity Summit, Socure's Identity Summit, but there was a person who co-founded a company and worked on this software for 3 years. 3 years later, they get a call from Washington saying your co-founder is a North Korean operative. And so at that point, again, that was like 1 to 2 person startup, right? It was just this one founder with this other.
The other guy is North Korean. Essentially.
Yeah. Which is crazy because now, and then like basically all that code was held, right? Unless like saying, unless you give me X amount of money, when they found out, like, you're not getting this code back, you're gone, right? So that's a crazy example. Another example that I hear, and this one happens quite frequently, is sometimes it's not a remote role, but they say this, right? When like they get hired and the company is like, oh, this is not a remote role, it's fine, right? Like we're not going to get any, fraudsters coming into this because they can't be physically here. The day before, they say, my mother got really sick, or I broke my leg, or this happened, or that happened. And they say, I need to work remote for the first month. And then that keeps extending. Things keep going bad in their lives. And like the worst thing is, Mike, is like some people actually have those circumstances, right? Situations where they are unable to come into an in-person role. And that can happen. I think that happened to one of our coworkers. When she first joined, she broke her foot. And so she couldn't, but like how, it's so difficult it's so difficult when like these fraudsters are using these tactics and for us to figure out if it's really true or not, unless we have the, multi-verification, like I mentioned earlier.
Mike, if you want more story time, I got 2.
Oh, okay,
Zach,
more story time. Okay, good one.
Well, if you want. One thing we can do is like, because this has been going on, everyone sees the fake resumes, but it's like, how long has this actually been happening? And like, are there people in your company that like shouldn't be there? And so sometimes some of our bigger customers do a look back. One of our customers, we found that there was 25 Nigerian nationals who all got a job there using the exact same word for word resume. So we,
yeah, I would hate to do the reverse lookup.
Oh God, yeah. That one was pretty crazy. And I'll shelve the other one actually because I don't want to. I don't think I can tell that story.
It's amazing that I think it's good to know about this because it's good to know what's possible. When I'm like, if I'm going through a bunch of candidates and whatnot, and I would say use your gut. If someone's resume looks exactly like the perfect resume that your ATS would shoot out at you, then that's kind of telling, because and honestly, I think that's part of the reason why the current hiring model right now is so broken. You see so many people it's so easy to apply. It needs to be a little bit harder to apply, but still easy if you are a real person, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
mean,
we are,
thing it's
yeah.
we're probably
Sorry.
going in the
So
other direction, right? Because there's a lot of really good companies out there that are making it really easy to apply. And I mean, even myself, like I use AI for work, for life. Like I'm an early adopter. So if I were to apply to a job right now, and there's jobs, I mean, I have a job, obviously that's how I'm on this podcast, but I'm not going anywhere. So if anyone's from Socure is listening, this is definitely not happening. But if I were to be in the job market, like there's ways to take my experience and run it through AI and kind of, form it to the role, which is what you used to do. It just wasn't so easy where you could do this like at
yeah,
scale. So I think that part of the problem is going to get worse. You don't want really good people that are just good at using AI to make their resume better to not get the job. In fact, using AI might make them better at the job you're hiring them for, especially as we
yeah.
continue
It's
to
just
go
that
forward.
the
And
current like matching to like terms and stuff within the job description and stuff, that type of matching is going to have to
yeah,
go away because it's just too easy to get around. But we're already at a half an hour, guys. So I wanted to thank you for joining me today. And if people want to find out more about Socure, where do they go?
yeah, just go to
Probably the internet.
Socure.com. Yeah, go to the internet. You can look up Jinbae and myself on LinkedIn if you're in talent and you want to talk about this, whether it's you just want education. As Jinbae mentioned, we're relying on the industry to shape our perspective on how we build the product as well. So we want to keep the conversation open. So Socure.com. Also check out Jinbae Kim or Zach Cilman on LinkedIn. We're happy to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you both. It's a crazy world out there right now, and I can't wait to hear about the next things that people try to do to break into companies.
It's crazy. Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate you having us on your platform.
yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for tuning in to the Totally Talent podcast by HR.com. We hope you find today's episode insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to explore more episodes and discover valuable resources at hr.com/podcasts, where you can listen to all of our podcasts. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and making a difference in the world of talent.